very much for joining us. So my name is Sarah Cragg and I'm chair of the Sustainability Committee here at BritCham, and we're sponsoring this event. Our Sustainability Committee seeks to educate and showcase great examples of corporate responsibilities, issues and practice in Asia, and really encourage other companies wherever they are on the journey to join us to become more sustainable. I'm an Associate Director of MullenLowe Salt, and we're a sustainability communications agency that works with companies and brands to embed sustainability into what they do and then how they communicate that to the benefit of stakeholders, employees, and the society around them. So thank you very much to the sponsors today. That's the Fry Group and also Prudential. A quick introduction to the event. So this is the Purpose-Led Leadership event, creating more purpose-led and conscious organizations. So we'll really be digging into issues like, what does it mean to be a purpose-led leader? What does this mean for the business, their employees, and the community around them? And Carla Henry, the Managing Director of Singapore and Australia for Bridge, will be moderating this discussion. We'll talk more about this in a second. I also want to introduce Christopher Langwellner, who's CEO and co-founder of NamZ, and he will again discuss more about what this really means in a moment. Good morning, and over to Carla to begin the discussions. You're on mute, Carla.
Unmute. There we go. That's my favourite trick, and no one has to do it. Possibly start without someone being asked to unmute. So good morning, everyone. Thank you so much for spending your morning with us, and we're really looking forward to hopefully a fruitful session with you all. So we're going to start this morning just by doing a bit of a welcome and a check-in, see how you were all doing this morning. I'll then give a little bit of an overview as to what do we mean by purpose-led leadership and how is that important to organisations right now. And then we'll get into a panel discussion where I'll moderate a bit of a fireside chat with Sarah and Chris, and then we'll kind of wrap up with some top tips and send you on your way this morning. So hopefully that sounds like what you signed up for today. And we'll kind of do a mixture of presenting, and then we'll also come off of the present mode into the gallery mode. So if you're not familiar with Zoom, I think that would probably be quite unusual in the current climate. But if for some reason you haven't used Zoom yet, you can change your view to speaker view or gallery view at the top of your screen. So if you'd like to see everybody, you can switch between those two views, which is sometimes more fun. So some requests of you today. I know it is early in the morning, and I have made a special effort to put some makeup on this morning for the first time in many months, but it would be lovely to, if you want to pop your video on so we can see you all. If you're not talking, it would be great if you can go on mute, and we will give you some time at the end to kind of come off mute and ask questions. And just notice, you know, how things land with you today. Notice if anything gives you what we call like a light bulb moment, and we'd love to hear kind of at the end what you're taking away and what the insight has been for you throughout the session. And feel free to use the chat box as well. We're going to have a little bit of a practice using that now. So we'd love to hear kind of in the chat box, what's your name and where are you from? How are you feeling this morning? All feelings welcome. Might be frustrated at the juggle of homeschooling or being on Zoom again so early, or maybe happy and excited. However you're feeling, all is welcome. And what would you most like to get out of the session today? So if you want to just type in the chat box as you're settling in, that would be great to hear from each of you. Great. Thanks, Sharad. Great to hear from you. Mac, my lovely colleague, glad you're inspired this morning. Learning more about purpose. Good morning. Oh, well done, Zoe. That's amazing. Already been for a walk around the Botanic Gardens. Impressed. Hi, Susie. Only 2 more weeks left of lockdown. I'm very excited too. Joshua, stressed. I hope this will make you feel a little less stressed. So great. I'll let you check in and please, look at what other people are sharing as well in the chat box, but I'll carry on just to keep us on time. So So it's interesting, when we started planning this event, it was pretty back in last year when you know, the world before COVID-19, if we remember that. And so it's really interesting that we're actually holding this event during this season. And so actually, I think this event is more relevant than it's ever been. And we know Unilever are not perfect, but we do love the way that they talk about purpose and purpose-led leadership. So one of the really recent articles that Alan Jope, current CEO of Unilever, wrote is really all about how he believes that brands with purpose grow, companies with purpose last, and people with purpose thrive. And that this is going to be even more important in a post-coronavirus world. And I think that all the research that's kind of coming out right now in terms of what employees want, what consumers want, and what societies want, is that people want organizations to step up even more in this era that we are in right now. And I guess the other philosophy we hold about purpose is that purpose and profitability go hand in hand. It's a tension, it's not a trade-off. And Paul Polman, who was the previous CEO of Unilever, really was a pioneer in this space of believing that actually you can do well and do good. You can make money and make a difference. So that's kind of the context for our session today as we set off. So if we think about what do we mean by being a purpose-led leader, so these might be some things you hear Chris and Sarah talk about today. We believe purpose-led leadership starts from the inside. So it's about you and who you are. It's about getting clear on your purpose, your mission, and the impact that you think you want to have in the world. It's knowing why you do what you do beyond just making money, which I know is quite a lot at the front of many of our minds right now as we ride this potential depression, recession coming up. The third point, you genuinely care about other people and you're values led. Very important point number 4, you're courageous and you act. You don't just think about what might need to change in the world, you actually do something about it. Number 5, you're a systems thinker and you really connect the dots in your organization and beyond. And then point 6, this is a great point that Chris made yesterday as we were preparing for this, that you really balance efficiency and effectiveness. You're not a leader who just checks the boxes because these things seem right. You are always asking yourself, why am I doing this? And is this the right thing to do right now? Number 7, Simon Sinek, who many of you may know, but he famously said, you know, a purpose-led leader follows you because they want to, not because they have to. So, you know, as a purpose-led leader, you're not hierarchical or power-based, and you genuinely seek to create followership from people around you. And then number 8 is also super important. You do have a successful business that's financially viable and is making a big difference in the world, or a small difference, but it's making a difference and a contribution. So I'd love you to kind of reflect on those for yourself and think, I imagine if you're here, many of you are already doing those things, but are there any that you might want to think even more about as you go through our session today? And then, you know, connecting to Paul Polman's point about doing well and doing good, we believe purpose-led businesses really understand what we call their purposeful advantage. So they're really looking at what are their organizational capabilities, what are the unique strengths that they have, what do their customers want and need, and how could they be most of service to their customers, and what does society really need from them? How do they bring their capabilities, their consumers, in service of the greater good? And as we are the Sustainability Committee, we're obviously very committed and passionate about the UN sustainability goals. That's also a great frame to think about how you're making a difference in the world. So hopefully that all makes sense in terms of context. And what we'd love in terms of questions is, if you've got questions as we go, please do type them in the chat box. And then what we will do at the end is we will kind of have 15 minutes where we'll open up for questions so that we can hear from everybody. So hopefully I've stopped sharing my slides now and you can all see each other. If you go to big screen view, for those of you, there's so many of us, you might have to toggle between the screens. But anyway, I'm going to start to get to know Chris and Sarah a little bit now. And so, Chris, I'm going to come to you first. Maybe it'd just be great if you could tell us a little bit about who you are and what does it mean to you to be a purpose-led leader?
Thank you very much, Carla. Good morning, everybody. This is extremely exciting, seeing so many people coming into this call so early in the morning. I think everybody in today's day and age experiences a lot of Zoom conversations and team meetings and so on and so forth. And then here we are. There's one more in the early hours. So thank you very much. I feel extremely privileged to be part of this. As you may hear from my accent, I'm not English British. I come from Austria, a place called Salzburg that is so famous for its Sound of Music. Sorry, I had to let that slide in. What brings me to this session here to answer Carla's question is really the opportunity that presented itself to myself about 6 years ago or 7 years ago in the meantime, and that is to basically step out from the corporate world and really assess the sort of what is the right thing to do going forward in the agro-food industry, the nutrition and how we eat and consume food and everything that is connected with it. And it ultimately led me to establish and initiate the nutritional paradox. And I have to admit, Bridge and Mac in particular was very fundamental in initiating this. And most recently, we have not only discussed as to what is broken, but we also took our fate in our own hands and launched a consumer brand that's called What If. So extremely proud to be part of this. I hope we can share a little bit more as to what the purpose really means for us as an organization and how it affects and reflects in the corporate culture per se. And look forward to the Q&A at the end of the day. Thank you.
Thanks, Chris. Well, maybe while we still have you, what if you think about your why and kind of what drove you to both, you have a business that does well, and also you have your nutritional paradox that does good, and your new consumer brand. Maybe just tell us a little bit about, what motivates you and why you do that. What's your purpose?
What motivated me essentially in getting going and doing something fundamentally different was that I saw my children growing up being confronted with all of this, excuse me, my French, with junk food, this obesogenic environment in which we are essentially living in. And my kids struggled with gaining too much weight. They struggled to stay healthy. I struggled to be healthy. I had huge overweight and I had a problem with it. And I knew what was broken, and it was so frustrating of not being able to really move the needle towards the right direction. So I was fortunate enough to exit from a business before, had a bit of cash, and then I started this organization that really tries to put food on its head and do different things. So, and fundamentally what we have done is asking the why question and the effectiveness. Are we doing the right thing? Or are we just another brand or another NGO out there that's, spending essentially money for corporate sustainability? And we didn't want to go down that path. We really drove for impact, and impact in the sense that you want to close some sort of an economy that loops itself and feeds itself by the way of creating demand for products that essentially are healthy for us people. As well as then create demand for forgotten crops, future fit crops as we call them, that grow and strive on degraded arable land, and therefore give alternative and new incomes to farming communities, and hence increase the resilience of these farming communities. Because in today's day and age, it doesn't matter where you are, if you're a farmer in the Midwest in the US or a smallholder farmer somewhere in Indonesia, you have fundamentally the same problem, and that most of these folks are heavily under debt and struggle to make ends meet. So for us, the real purpose is to bring this 360-degree sustenance about in closing the loop consistently, so that we strive impact not only on one level, but on multiple levels. And that is about it. That motivates us every day.
Thanks, Chris. It's great to hear you share that. And that you mentioned brands and being kind of a purpose-led brand. So I'll kind of hand over to Sarah to introduce yourself a little bit more, what you do, and what does being purpose-led or purpose-led leader mean to you, Sarah?
Sure, thanks, Carla. So I guess for me, it's all about really trying to align the values that you have personally with the companies that you're kind of working for. And at one stage in my life, I was a rather unhappy corporate lawyer. And I think that what I was doing just did not align with what my values were and what I wanted to be doing in the world. So since then, I really kind of took a switch and have really been working with brands and companies to really try to find what is that greater purpose that you were talking about earlier. What is it that the company does that's beyond just making money, that is of value to their communities and the world they live in, while trying to kind of minimize their negative kind of externalities on the world. But I think that's kind of what really drives me, and what I really see from purpose-led leadership is really where companies have managed to understand what that purpose is, that is bigger than just making money. What is the value that they bring? And then how do they kind of incorporate that into their culture so that they really engage with their employees and they engage with their stakeholders and they engage with the community that is really around them. You mentioned Unilever earlier, and I think it's fascinating that Unilever is one of the top brand companies that people want to work with. Sure, there's all the kind of cool, sexy new companies, which we all know have like amazing places to work, like Facebook and Google. But people fundamentally also want to work with Unilever, which basically just makes kind of pretty ordinary everyday products like soap and toothpaste and disinfectant. They're not particularly sexy products, but people want to work with them because they believe that they have this bigger value. They believe that they have this bigger purpose, and they can tie their own values to what they do on an everyday basis. Even if they're an accountant, a lawyer, a member of the catering staff, they feel that they are fundamentally part of that bigger purpose that is doing something beyond that kind of everyday job that they do. So what we really do at SALT is really trying to work with these brands and companies to really find those and to embed them into what they're doing. And I think something that we'll talk about a little bit more as we go through, and what we're really finding with COVID at the moment, is that while you might want to find that purpose, you also need to think about the other side of what your business is doing. If you know what your purpose is, you also need to be kind of thinking about more sustainably. You need to be transparent. No company is perfect, but your purpose is nothing if you're also kind of causing problems on the sustainability side as well. So I guess that's really what drives me in kind of trying to find those purpose-led businesses. I think what's great at the moment is we're increasingly seeing so many kind of companies and B Corps where you're really finding that these companies are really trying to walk the talk. No one's perfect, but they're really kind of making great strides in this area and being really transparent about the changes they're trying to make. And they're really seeing a real consumers are really kind of appreciating this and really switching towards those more purposeful brands.
Thanks, Sarah. And I mean, Sarah, you made a great point there where you kind of you talked about, organization, employees and society really wanting organizations to kind of rally even more during COVID-19. And what examples are you seeing of organizations that are really living their purpose even more right now and helping out even more?
Sure. I guess what's really interesting to me, and what I think is kind of hopefully where this kind of whole movement is going, is that it's not necessarily that they're actually kind of fulfilling what they would have originally considered their purpose. They're really thinking about, they've stopped thinking about themselves and what kind of fits with their brand. And they're really thinking about what a company, as a company, they're really in a place to help with. So instead of people talking more about their purposes, which might be something to do with their brand and how they think about themselves, they're really thinking about what do we actually do and how can we actually help. So I think some great examples, and kind of even within the chamber, are Diageo. So obviously they've given a huge amount of money, they've given a lot of their kind of basic alcohol to the countries in the surrounding area so that they can turn that into sanitizer, and where they have factories, they've switched to making sanitizer. Some of the more British kind of companies, McLaren, Dyson, they're all working on the kind of ventilator coalitions, and obviously that has nothing to do with McLaren and Dyson on a day-to-day basis, but they're engineers, they know how to do that, and they've kind of switched very quickly to being able to do that. I think also just looking at kind of local companies, there's a great local company in B Corp called RPRE, which is Right People Renewable Energy. And they're a renewable energy company. And, they obviously couldn't immediately think, how do we help? But they've obviously kind of really thought it through. And right now they're offering great deals to social services and NGOs and trying to really help them with their overhead. So, I think it's about not necessarily thinking about what fits with your brand, but what is it that your company does and how can it help? And I think there's some great examples of less marketing and more action that we can hopefully really take forward into the future.
Yeah, I love that, Sarah. I was on a Zoom webinar with some people the other week, and one of the things that one of the speakers there said is that consumers can really tell at the moment if you're trying to sell to them versus you're really trying to help them. And I think that people are really wanting, organizations and us all to kind of help each other out much more versus try and sell us stuff that we don't quite have the capacity to deal with at the moment.
Yeah, so, and there's some great websites at the moment popping up in kind of the UK and the US, which kind of are really being very transparent and rating companies on what they have been doing. So yeah. It will be noticed, and people are. It's great to see, and I think this is something Chris and I have spoken about in the past, that consumers are really starting to ask questions. It's not about that kind of nice emotional corporate video. It's about consumers kind of stepping up and digging that little bit deeper and really trying to understand the details behind it. And websites like this are really going to, people are taking notice. And sure, it's a very difficult economic situation at the moment. People may be thinking more about what's cheap, where can they work, all of those things. But long term, people are going to really be thinking about this and remembering it.
Thanks, Sarah. And so then, Chris, I mean, you are CEO of your organization and you founded it. So I imagine, like many leaders right now, you are kind of balancing that, do well and do good. And I know you're doing lots of things to really support your employees right now. So maybe just share a little bit around how you're handling and navigating what's going on right now.
Thank you very much. Yeah, so what we have seen particularly, we're operating in 3 countries. We are in Singapore, Australia, as well as in Malaysia. And unprecedented times. I have never experienced, of course, the government closing down a factory and chasing the employees home and making them stay at home. So it was really, really a tough time. I think there is a lot of anxiety, particularly we are as an organization, we are rather young. We're 6 years old, hence we don't have piles of cash of retained profits. So everybody knows that in the organization, and there was a level of anxiety among the team. As well as, how do we get organized? Luckily, as an organization, we were quite used to doing Zoom calls long before. We do that for years now on a frequent basis. So the technology implementation wasn't really a challenge. But what was really a challenge for somebody like me who strives really of engaging the chemistry in a room the moment I meet people, that sort of interaction and the corridor meetings and, hey, have a coffee together, have a chit chat, obviously doesn't take place anymore. So therefore, there was the need for us to really say how do we actually navigate this now? How do we make sure that we don't leave our people behind? Because there are people who essentially need a lab to work. There are people who need a factory line to work. There are people who need a quality control lab to work. And what do they do if they are at home? So what we really thought of doing is to institutionalize, essentially, or reach out to the entire organization in a very similar format as we are doing this today morning, whereby I'm basically saying that what's going on for us as an organization, where do we see the risks coming about, and be really, really transparent as to how we see it. In situations like that, my experience was that, just be upfront out there with the data that you have and tell the employees as to what's going on and what's the reality. And then more recently, we started to reach out on a one-to-one basis with each and everyone in the organization. We take half an hour to 45 minutes time to essentially listen to everybody, to listen to them, to their pain at home, if they have family issues, what's going on for them. There are colleagues of ours who have small children, can't send them to school, still struggle with balancing work and so on and so forth. And we're trying to help them through saying that, what is it that you can do? How can you organize it? Forget timing, take care of the children sort of challenges first. And if you have a minute, then come in and do that. At the same token, what has surfaced is that people are much more time aware. So if we call for a meeting, people are on time, people come in prepared. And I think what was really, really inspiring to see and experience over the last couple of weeks was that as an organization, ironically, we actually grew together much more than we were before. There is this energy that has been unleashed in the organization that says, hey, we are in this together, whether or not in Australia, Malaysia, or in Singapore. Those boundaries have totally broken down, essentially, because earlier it was like Singapore talks to Malaysia, Malaysia talks to Australia, blah, blah, blah. But because we all assume everybody is the same, everybody is equal. And that brought the entire organization much, much closer together as it was before. And that was a very positive outcome, to be honest. People also started to understand their individual responsibilities and rose to the challenge and said, hey, I have an hour time, throw stuff to me. I don't mind doing stuff that I usually don't do. And that might even be that our factory manager went out to the shop floor and started to produce products the moment we were allowed to do so. And that is really, really inspiring, because if you only have a few people in the factory and you struggle to keep up with the production volume, and then, you basically, this most senior management rolls up the sleeves and walks in and helps out on this sort of level, again, is one indication that the organization has really grown together massively. And there's a great bunch of learning for us as an organization. We will carry on doing this in this format. First of all, I don't believe that after the lockdown and the circuit breaker in Singapore, we will get back to normal. I think it's going to stay here for some time, for long, that sort of culture of working from home and whatnot. And I think we'll keep on doing this sort of procedures because it's just working so well for us.
Thanks, Chris. And there's a great question in the chat box from Dalvinda, which I might ask you. So, I imagine as you've navigated all of that, there's good days and there's bad days, and there's, moments where you're like, oh my goodness, and how are we going to handle this? So how do you lead in this crisis situation and stay cool as a leader? What kind of top tips have you got around how you've been handling things?
The honest answer is that I believe that employees that come into an organization and are inspired to work for a common purpose and impact that we want to generate, they don't mind seeing the reality, they don't mind seeing the true emotions that people have. And every now and then, seeing them, that even most senior management struggles and doesn't have the answers right now, but we are working every day hard in order to find them, helps them also to rise up and become more resourceful in a way. So my take on this is that essentially we walk in to basically say, how can I hold myself, but yet be very, very authentic and be very, very true to what's going on for us as an organization. Heck, we know we have to raise cash, but let everybody know, right? And there is an amazing, so we have been going through the organization in one-on-one calls, as I've said before. And of course, we are addressing situations and issues that may or may not come about. That is, for example, how do we address payroll? Can we save money here, and so on and so forth. And in all honesty, I have not had one call with an employee who said that, no, I'm not up for it. If you cut my salary, I'm leaving. Not a single one. They immediately know that, the well-being of the organization is at stake, and we want to all fight that through together. And that is essentially, I think, the authenticity that has been displayed has enabled that, I think, not only from me, but from everybody in the organization.
Yeah. Thanks, Chris. Yeah, and I love what you said around not knowing the answer, because I think one of the key things for leaders right now is that if anybody knows how to solve this, then, they're a very unique human being, because there's just so many factors involved. So actually, I think the art of not knowing is a really powerful leadership act right now, and how you can bring people in your organization together, get that collective wisdom, and then people come up with the answer with you versus feeling it's done to them. So I think it's really great that you're doing that in your organization as well, Chris. And so if I I know we had it on our question list, but it's also coming up in the chat box as well. So, I mean, who do we think are great examples right now of, and I'll come to your point, Lexi, of the opposite of that too, but, you know, who do we think are great examples of organizations who are really purpose-led at the moment? Who's really standing out for either of you, Sarah or Chris, in terms of great examples that we could be role modeling?
Sarah, you want to go first, or should I go?
You can go. I'm happy you go, if you have one at the top of your mind.
What comes to mind, I've actually been asked to do a newspaper interview last night from a newspaper, BritCham in Salzburg, and I did that, and I was asked a lot about the government in Singapore. And aren't we all blessed to be in Singapore right now? And the way these leaders have stepped up and have basically done their utter best. And you know, look at them. They're sitting on dioceses, right? And also say, hey, we don't know everything, and we are gathering the data, we are analyzing as fast as we possibly can, and we are making decisions based on that. And I think, to me, that really stands out. We don't have to, as an organization today, I don't have to worry whether or not the subsidized salaries for the Singaporeans and PRs are being credited into our account. IRS does it. I just don't have to worry about it. There's no application to do it and stuff like that. I find that is incredible. And I think they are not getting enough praise. Honestly, I think the way we experience that here is great. It's inconvenient for us all, yes. And we may, in 5 years down the line, identify that we have been overprotective or what, but only in 5 years. In hindsight is always 2020, right? So in that way, that comes to mind to me, really, to basically balance out, to say humanity and solidarity vice versa economy. How do I balance that, and how do I message it? For me, that's a great act, to be honest. I think I've personally picked up quite a lot from how they conduct themselves.
Yeah, absolutely, Chris. I'm with you. I feel proud, especially when I do compare it to our British government, which I know we're probably not supposed to talk about in BritCham. But, you know, I think when you look all around the world and you see how different leaders are handling this, I think that, yeah, we can definitely give a gold star to Singapore right now. Thanks, Chris. And Sarah, for you, what are you noticing?
Yeah, I guess just to kind of add on to what Chris has said, I think one thing that really, as a communications kind of specialist, has really struck me is the way that the government really obviously communicates in all the different relevant languages, but also uses the relevant examples for that is relevant to that language, that culture, that community. I think having it really shows a real empathy and understanding of the audience and the people that it's working with. And I think that's something that great leaders need to really understand. They've really thought about how best to get this message across to all the different sectors of society. They've thought about, is it tone deaf? They've really kind of made sure that it is relevant. I guess the company that sticks out to me, I think, as Chris said, in some ways, Singapore was so lucky. It's a bit harder at the moment to really see what those brilliant examples of leadership are, because the Singapore government has done such a great job. And I think in some ways, it may be much further down the line that we really hear about the great examples of great leadership, because these people are probably internally focused at the moment. They're not focused externally necessarily. We've got the examples of companies doing great things, but the real leaders that are really focusing on keeping their businesses going, trying to keep their communities going and keeping their people kind of their livelihoods safe, we may not hear about at the moment. I guess one company that I'd like to kind of touch upon, which is very much in the purpose-based space, is Chobani, which people may or may not know, the yogurt company. If you don't know them, I really suggest you kind of go and kind of check them out. And they've been doing some great things in the purpose space. The head of Chobani, really hires kind of refugees in his factories. I always make a point to try and dig them out whenever I can find them in Singapore. But what he's been doing at the moment recently are kind of 3 different things. It's really to donate a lot of yogurt to all the food banks around the US. Obviously, that's something that they can very kind of easily do. Secondly, they're really looking at how can they use their assets to really support the local community. So they have some shops in New York, so they've now turned them into basically food banks where anyone can go and get a healthy meal. And then the third thing, which I kind of think is almost the most powerful but less spoken about, they've given all of their marketing dollars and brand voice to one of their NGO partners. Now, NGOs, as we know, are really struggling at the moment. And they've basically given all their marketing dollars, all their brand voice, and giving it to Feeding America, which is an NGO partner that they work with. And when I think lots of people will immediately jump to the fact that, oh, Chobani, it makes a healthy product, therefore it's in a really good space to help, but I don't do that, I can't help. Well, you know, every brand, every company has marketing spend that they could easily kind of donate and give to an NGO that is struggling at the moment. And I think that's a great example of a company that's not really necessarily thinking about what it looks like from a marketing perspective. They're really thinking about how they help and what assets do they have that they can best help.
I love that example, Sarah. I hadn't heard that. So thanks for sharing. And I think maybe it kind of connects a little bit to Henry's question. He's asking, you know, in these times when organizations are cutting salaries and reducing staff potentially, how do we, you know, support impact investment and CSR in our organizations whilst we're, you know, potentially having to cut costs? Do either of you have a perspective on that? Which I think, Sarah, that's a great example that you've just shared, but any other examples that we know about?
Yeah, I guess it's a really good question, and it's a question we get kind of a lot in general on kind of ROI. What is the ROI? And I guess in some ways I would say it's a matter of thinking about turning it slightly on its head and thinking about it in a different way. I think if we think about it as a separate part of the business, a siloed kind of division within the business, if you think about CSR as this separate kind of thing, then during recessions and during these kind of times, it's always going to be one of the first to get cut. But if we can think of it more as part of the business, it's part of the culture, it's part of how we make our product, it's embedded into who we are and what we do, then it's less likely to be that kind of something that's very kind of just a line on a P&L that we could kind of cross out and save some money. I think also thinking about how kind of we use that to embed it into our companies to actually save money. If sustainability kind of often people think is all about spending money to save the environment. Well, actually, if we think about reducing our waste, that's sustainability. And reducing waste is a great way for, if we're reducing the inputs and our outputs, that's a great way to save money for the business. So if we're doing things more effectively, more sustainably, then maybe you can actually reduce the amount of water you're using or energy you're using, and that will actually kind of save money. So I think in some ways, if we can try and embed it into the company and think of it in slightly different ways, then that's a really good way for kind of long-term building sustainability into a business that doesn't being thought of as a kind of cost item.
Thanks, Sarah. That's a great example. And I guess that connects to kind of what we were talking about in terms of purposeful advantage. If you really bring together your skills, your talents, your passions, your consumers, and what society needs right now, you can really create quite a lot of change with not a lot of dollars, actually. So that's a really great way. And Chris, what about you?
I can obviously speak most from our point of view, and the way we have actually incorporated names and what we do. Sustainability and purpose is deeply wired into the DNA of the organization. So in days like this, what we have done is we basically paused all long out projects, research projects, and we just doubled down on what we do as a business. We have even gone further into West Africa to even buy more of products from smallholder farming communities. We have initiated, even through these difficult times, an outreach program in Java, in central Indonesia, in order to, again, bring these crops about. And we switched on a factory despite all the odds of COVID-19. So for us, there is no trade-off between impact, CSR, and the business per se, and ultimately making sure that the shareholders are being happy with the dividends that they're receiving over their investment dollar. But I think I want to address the aspect of salary cuts and so on and so forth. The way we are trying to navigate that challenge is to say, can we come up with a system that defers the salaries? So in other words, can we now say for 6 months we are saving, say, 20% of the payroll, Let's put this into a bucket and hold on to it and see whether or not we need it. If we need it, everybody knows in the organization, we will actually unleash that in order to keep on going. If we don't need it, let's have a great party at the end of it and enjoy the fruits of coming together. So this is the way we are talking to people. We're trying to make that work. We don't know yet whether or not there's an income tax impact, and all of that stuff has to be assessed. But it is technically in nature. Conceptually, that's how we want to navigate the pay cut, the salary cut, and so on and so forth. If I may add one more word to it, on one of my recent addresses to the organization, I said something along the lines of saying that today you will show your team members and your colleagues whether or not you really mean it and you're in it for the long run. And what I really refer to is that, if you try to be a team, a sports team, and you want to be a high performance team, now is the time to really make sure that everybody who is in the organization dresses up properly, comes to work properly, has the gears well polished in order to actually do the job well. In other words, if there are people in it right now who are not really mean it and are letting the others down, we are also said very, very clear, sorry, then you're cut. Then you're not deserving the coming together of the organization, essentially. I think that message was very, very clear at the beginning as well.
Yeah, it's that, are we all on the same team? Are we in it together? And, can we all pull in the same direction is really important. While we have you, Chris, I might just ask, I think, Manish, your question is really, it's always the tension of leadership and authenticity. So Manish's question is, during this times of crisis, how do we balance transparency with actually some things we may not want to share with employees? I mean, I'm philosophically of the view it's much better to share as much as we know. But Chris, how are you handling that in your business? Given you're probably thinking about all of things, are you sharing all of that with employees, or how do you navigate that tension?
That's an excellent question, because there's always tension in how much do you share, particularly if it comes down to financing and the health of the organization per se. If you look into concepts such as fundraising, rights issues, somebody who has studied biological sciences might not have really the necessary background information and experience to really understand what that all means. And it can cause more trauma and more anxiety than it does good. But in general terms, I'm a huge fan of sharing high levels of, for example, saying that we are looking into our cash reserves and we're making sure that, for example, as a matter of fact, we are looking into what is it that we need to do with our cash reserves in order to see ourselves through until the end of 2022, because that's what I think is going to take the business to go forward. That's a long time frame. There's a lot of cash that we're talking about, and people know that. And then in our one-on-one sessions, if people have questions, we then go in and explain more details and take time out to make them understand as to what that means and how they potentially can participate.
Thanks, Chris. That's really helpful. And I mean, I guess to your earlier point, we might also need employees to help us solve a lot of these challenges right now. So if we give people the best sources of information, I'm a great believer that people are very, naturally creative, resourceful and whole, and they'll come up with the best ideas of how to get through this as well. So I'm just conscious that this is a great chat. We could chat all day is what I'm noticing. And also I want to open it up for some questions. If anybody wants to come off mute to ask Sarah or Chris a question directly, or if they have got a question, you can also type in the chat box. So I'll just kind of take a minute to open up the floor. Is there anyone who would like to ask a question to Chris or Sarah? This is the moment where we're like, is anybody going to ask a question? They may not, which is fine, but does anyone have anything they'd love to ask?
I do have a question, but I know there's a couple in the chat box, but I did a question. At the beginning, Chris, you were talking about the nutritional paradox. I would love to hear a little bit more about it. You've talked a lot about how, on the business side of things, how names creates an impact, but tell us a bit more about nutritional paradox, please.
Happy to do so, of course. The nutritional paradox got created out of an utter frustration that as a leader, I had to explain why we exist continuously. Things like the conflict of living in a day and age where we have more than 800 million people being hungry and going hungry to bed every night. And then we have a huge chunk of a population, 2.3 billion people on a global basis, that are essentially overweight and obese. We have probably 2.5 billion people that are suffering from hidden hunger. Very difficult to identify because they look from the outside well. They have well-balanced body mass index and all of that. But we have that obesogenic environment around us. And that is predominantly driven by us eliminating agrobiodiversity out of our food. And that has consequences. The consequences are that 7 out of 10 people in today's world suffer from what we eat. Today, people with cardiovascular diseases, strokes, colon cancer, bowel cancer, these are all diet-related issues. But that's not the end of it. Because we have consolidated our raw material base to just 3 crops, making 60% of all calories that we are consuming in today's day and age. Because of that, we are actually, and excuse my French, we are screwing the planet. Agriculture and food is the second largest contributor to climate change. And we are leaving large banks of land behind that are degraded. Nobody cares about it anymore. And particularly vulnerable communities such as small farmers are then left alone with land that is not productive anymore. What do? They are being set in motion as so-called climate refugees. And if we don't do anything about that, that by end of 2030, we are going to add 120 million people into that climate refugee bucket. Today we are around 60 or 70 million migrants out there, and we're going to add 110. What that's going to mean for the world, I leave it to you to paint a picture around that. That frustration of having to explain all of this continuously before I could actually talk about the science behind what we do and how we actually tackling that, got us going to actually start the Nutrition Paradox, created as our nonprofit. And today we are articulating that basically around the SDGs, come together in partnership and try to resolve issues around that, particularly with regards to forgotten crops, bring agrobiodiversity back, make sure that we can grow products that are beneficial for human health on degraded arable land, make sure that there is a traceability in your supply chain and all of the rest of it. That is the Nutrition Paradox. That is hopefully becoming a foundation at one point in time. I'm working hard to get there. Right now, it has a bit on a down burner. There are urgent questions right now to address, but essentially that is the Nutrition Paradox. A system that talks about how complex it is, but also explains it is not just picking a superfood and then being healthy. Such a thing doesn't exist. It's all about the diet, and it's about how it cascades way back down and how it impacts. So that is essentially what the Nutrition Paradox is all about, Tessa.
Thanks, Chris. Thanks for your question, Tessa. So we're getting some great questions coming through on the chat box. So maybe I'll go to Lexi. Do you want to ask your question out loud, or shall I read it for you? You want to come off?
I'm happy for you to read it.
Okay, all right, I'll be your voice. So Lexi's asking a question that I'm noticing lots of our clients are also asking. So the question around how will COVID-19 really shift the way we work and interact with each other? And, we're already seeing a lot of those trends happening. So, how will we look at humanity and purpose, do you think, Sarah and Chris, in this kind of post-COVID-19 world? What's your sense? What would be different?
I fundamentally believe that we are going to see a totally new defined battlefield, as I call it, on the other side of COVID-19. I think it's a great opportunity, there are great opportunities that present themselves to us. But I'm also afraid that particularly competition to us is going to use COVID-19 to kind of look into what could not be broken before COVID-19 now can be broken because of COVID-19, and therefore all of a sudden we are going to see corporations gearing up with a totally different gear and getting ready for a new sort of battle. I think it's going to be extremely exciting going into the next 10 years or so after COVID-19 and see what is going to emerge. I think, however, that if you, for example, if we were to say, if you have to message in terms of marketing dollar that healthy eating is important and the nutritional paradox and how you do all of that stuff, probably if we would have to do that pre-COVID-19 with 100, I think post-COVID-19, it's going to take maybe just 20. So in other words, it's going to be significantly cheaper to explain to people as to why we need to do things differently. And as Sarah has said at the beginning, I'm extremely optimistic to see, especially the young generations, to come up and say, enough is enough. We don't want to be part of this anymore. Stop giving us all this nonsense and do stuff differently. And I think that is a great opportunity that emerges on the other side. The key to it is getting there, getting to the other side.
We've got to get through the messy middle, definitely. Thanks, Chris. Sarah, what's your perspective?
Yeah, I mean, I really hope so. I think, what this, as I said earlier, what this emergency has done, what this crisis has done, is shown that companies can really make change and they can move quickly when they want to and when they have to. So some of the things that we've been saying previously, I think everyone appreciates that companies are on a journey, but timelines like 2050, that's 30 years away. That is a really long horizon to be thinking about. And it's great that companies are starting to have those conversations and those commitments for around 2050, but really we've seen that you can act and we can see that if you want to, you can really act very quickly. So why are kind of commitments taking that long? So I think it may not happen immediately, but I think there will be a renewed push from people to really dig behind what companies are doing to help their communities and really kind of try to interrogate that a little bit further. There's a great mock-up going around on the internet of kind of basically a merge of all the different advertising, American mostly, adverts that is kind of all merged together, and it's all, we're in this together, unprecedented times, we're here to support you. And I think people are really beginning to realize that that's not enough. Like, you can't just make a nice advert that says like, oh, we understand and we're here to support you. Now you need to be taking action. And what I really hope is that we see from consumers, we see from employees, that they're really asking their company, okay, great, you're saying this, but what action are you taking? So I think that will kind of hope, well, my hope is that that's a real kind of shift in consumer and employer thinking. There's a big movement at the moment around kind of build back better. I don't want to say that this is a great opportunity, because that, this is a terrible crisis that's had horrendous impacts on lots of people, but it is a moment in time where we can all stop and think about how are we doing things. And there's a big movement around kind of build back better. So as the world's all stopped, like, how do we spend all that money that's going to be pumped into the economy on things that actually create a positive future for us and the generations to come? And as Chris mentioned earlier, kind of that means talking about things that maybe aren't that kind of sexy or exciting. We really need to be thinking about agriculture, the land, the soil that we're using. And these aren't things that consumers have currently really been particularly interested in, but we really need to find ways to kind of get them excited about it. What's really been shown during this time is that kind of resilient supply chains are vital. And hopefully what that means is, instead of thinking about those kind of marketing spend on these kind of very similar ads, we can really think about what those supply chains are, what the companies are using. Are they sustainable? Are they resilient, not only to the current crisis, but the current future climate crisis is to come?
Thanks, Sarah. It's all really great stuff. It's making me think as well, if you look at all the kind of career trends and statistics that are going around at the moment, you're also seeing a real uptick in applications to become teachers and doctors and nurses. And so all of these kind of undervalued professions in society previously are now the things that people really care about and are really realizing in these times what are the necessities. And I think we're seeing that in organizations as well, to Sarah's point, that actually, supply chain and, production were previously seen as kind of background, back office-y type activities, whereas now they're mission critical to actually keeping the lights on in the businesses. So I think we're seeing just a lot more care, a lot more agility. And I'm quite also enjoying just seeing a lot a lot of letting go of being perfect. Just good enough is good enough, and let's just get what we absolutely need to get done. And yeah, I'm really excited is a strange word to use, but I think this could be a real moment in time where we look back on this and think, wow, look at all the good things that were created through this crisis, and how they last long into the future. So I'm conscious we are pretty much at time, and Sabina is my great timekeeper behind us. So I'm just, are there any last questions to Sarah or Chris before we kind of wrap up? And if there, we'll capture your questions. I know there's a couple that I haven't answered in the chat box, but we will capture those and kind of come back to you with answers to those as well as we pull the final presentation together. So, I mean, there's just a couple of top tips that I kind of garnered from Sarah and Chris as we were chatting. So, really things that you can do to make an everyday difference to meaning and purpose in people's lives right now. So all the things that Chris talked about, communication with employees is so important right now. I don't think that you can over communicate at all. It's really a time for us all to step up, both, organizationally and societally, and really asking our employees to come together and work together to solve where we're at. Leadership, walking the talk, is really important. It's not going to wash if leaders are doing something different and expecting employees to do something of the opposite. Really noticing, designing your day. I'm often having to say to my team at the moment, are you working too much? Because I'm seeing people online at all different times of day or night. So really paying attention to that and encouraging your people to design a day that works for them. All the things that Sarah and Chris talked about in terms of what is this pivoting us towards, how can we use this time to build the future, upskill people, and balance leading for today and tomorrow. And then looking at long-term planning where we can, how can we make sure employees that have been with us on the journey stay with us on the journey, and all of those things. So hopefully that is helpful. Sabina, I think we'll send these slides out to everybody in the wrap up, won't we? So I'll hand back to you, Sarah.
Great, thank you very much. Thank you very much, Chris. Thank you, Carla. It's been a great discussion and great way to kind of start the day. And I hope everyone's feeling optimistic about the future and ready to kind of get back to their daily work. First of all, I want to thank you, the sponsors, the Fry Group and Prudential. Oh, I think I've done these slides the wrong way around, sorry. So Prudential sponsor the Future of Work, and then we've also got the Fry Group, who are a bigger sponsor. And then finally, I just need to mention the upcoming chamber events. Sorry, whoever's running the slides, I've messed this one up for you. But these are the upcoming events: the impact of COVID, positive psychology, mergers and acquisitions, the AGM, and of course International Women's Day, which we're still desperately trying to do, and the Great British Ball. So please do get in touch with your British Chamber of Commerce contact if you're interested in those, and obviously they're all on the website. There will also be an event feedback email, so you, if you could, we'd be very grateful if you could complete this and let us know what you thought and how we can improve our future events. And that's it from me. All that is left is to say thank you very much for joining us, and have a great day.